Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. Ordering the previous question on House Resolution 548. Adoption of House Resolution 548, if ordered, and suspending the rules and passing H.R. 2852. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 548, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 40, House Resolution 548. Resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 205 to amend the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act of 2006 to permanently extend the moratorium on leasing in certain areas of the Gulf of Mexico, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1146 to amend Public Law 115-97, commonly known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, to repeal the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge oil and gas program and for other purposes, and providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1941 to amend the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to prohibit the Secretary of the Interior, including in any leasing program, certain planning areas and for other purposes.
The question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
And voting underway here in the House. A couple of votes dealing with moving forward on 3 bills the House will be voting on this week that we just heard of, banning oil and gas drilling in Alaska and off the U.S. coast. Voting now on the previous question to close debate. And from House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, he says if the previous question is defeated, Republicans will amend the rule to immediately consider H.R. 4261, which would prohibit taxpayer funding of congressional campaigns. After this previous question vote, expecting a vote on the rule on the 3 bills, and then finally today a vote on one of the measures lawmakers debated under suspension of the rules earlier, dealing with homebuyer assistance. And while we're in this 15-minute vote on the previous question, we'll take a closer look at the 3 underlying measures dealing with the ban on oil drilling, specifically in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, and in the eastern Gulf of Mexico.
As the House gets set to debate 3 bills banning oil and gas drilling, we're joined by Rebecca Beich. She's the energy and environment reporter with The Hill. Her recent headline, Democrats to push for offshore drilling ban when Congress reconvenes. Tell us about the first piece of legislation from Joe Cunningham, Democrat from South Carolina. What would his bill do?
So this is a pretty big piece of legislation. It would block offshore drilling off of both the Atlantic and Pacific shores. Right now, there's not a ton of drilling going on either coast, but the Trump administration has made clear that they view both coastlines to have a lot of potential for offshore drilling. So you really see this as a move by Democrats to try to cut off the administration and make sure that these coastlines are permanently protected.
The one bill getting some bipartisan support coming out of the House Natural Resources Committee is by Florida Republican Francis Rooney. His measure getting 2 Republicans to vote for it in committee. Tell us about his bill dealing with drilling in the eastern Gulf.
Yeah, so Representative Rooney's bill would block any drilling from the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which is, of course, a huge part of Florida's coastline. That's something that is going to have a lot of support among Floridians. It's supported by a lot of the Florida delegation. Offshore drilling is hugely unpopular in Florida, both for economic and environmental reasons. People want to protect the shoreline.
Lastly, from Jared Huffman, Democrat from California, a measure that would deal with the current policy of allowing federal lands in Alaska drilling on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. When did Congress authorize the oil and gas drilling in ANWR, and what would his bill do?
So that was first authorized under the 2017 tax bill. It was a provision that was introduced by Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and it actually mandated allowing drilling in Anwar. So the bill from Representative Huffman would simply delete that portion of the text from the Tax Act and essentially block any drilling within the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge.
And what's the status of drilling nationwide in the U.S. right now?
There's really not a ton of offshore drilling happening in the U.S. beyond activity in the western Gulf of Mexico. So what you're seeing from Democrats is really an effort to block any future offshore drilling and from having offshore drilling expand beyond what it already has.
Rebecca Beich with The Hill. She covers energy and the environment. You can follow her reporting at thehill.com. Thanks so much for the update.
Thank you.
And here in the House, a vote underway, 15-minute vote dealing with the previous question. And if the previous question is defeated, according to Republican Whip Steve Scalise, Republicans will amend the rule to immediately consider a bill that would prohibit taxpayer funding of congressional campaigns. Then a vote on the rule on the three bills underlying this. And finally, a vote on one of the measures lawmakers debated earlier today under suspension of the rules, dealing with homebuyer assistance. And here in the House, the first vote of this round of votes today, the only vote that we're expecting today, is underway. This one on the previous question, which will close debate on the rule that governs three bills on banning oil and gas drilling in Alaska and off the U.S. coast. Also, the Republican whip, Steve Scalise, says if this previous question vote is defeated, Republicans will amend the rule to immediately consider another measure, which would prohibit taxpayer funding of congressional campaigns. We'll continue to watch the vote here on the House floor. Also, some news from Bloomberg today after President Trump announced he'd fired his national security advisor, John Bolton, after disagreeing strongly with many of his positions. As Bloomberg reports, Mr. Bolton was known for a hardline approach toward Iran, North Korea, and other countries. He was the third person to occupy the White House's highest-ranking national security job under President Trump. Via Twitter, the president wrote, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House." And he also tweeted, "I thank John very much for his service. I will be naming a new national security advisor next week." The National Security Advisor had been scheduled to take part in a White House press briefing today, held on the topic of terrorism with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. If you do want to go back and watch that, we have it online at cspan.org. After the president tweeted about Mr. Bolton being fired, he had contradicted the president on Twitter. He said he had offered to resign yesterday night, and that the president deferred that discussion. You could read more at Bloomberg.com.
On this vote, the yeas are 232 and the nays are 196. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Arizona.
Thank you. I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And continuing with votes here in the House, this is the second of 3 votes today. This one on the rule governing a package of 3 bans on oil and gas drilling in Alaska and on the U.S. coast. And in some reporting in Politico today on Democrats' impeachment messaging on conflicting signals from the House's most powerful Democrats, leaving rank-and-file lawmakers unable to say exactly whether the House is considering impeaching President Trump. Some see the messaging as strategic. It allows moderate Democrats to sidestep political questions about it, while letting progressives maintain that they're aggressively pursuing impeachment. But others doubt the tactics are intentional, and they note the strain on the Democratic caucus. You could read more at Politico.com. On Thursday, the House Judiciary Committee will consider a resolution on procedures for impeachment hearings. You can watch that live at 8 a.m. Eastern. We'll have it on C-SPAN 3, or you can tune in online or via the radio app. After this vote on the rule in the House, expecting one more vote in this series on homebuyer assistance.
On this vote, the yeas are 230, 105.
Mr. Larson of Connecticut. Mr. Larson of Connecticut votes aye. Mr. Cole of Oklahoma. Mr. Cole of Oklahoma votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 231 and the nays are 196. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is to vote on the motion of the gentleman from Guam, Mr. San Nicolas, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2852 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 2852, a bill to amend the National Housing Act to authorize state licensed appraisers to conduct appraisals in connection with mortgages insured by the FHA and to require compliance with the existing appraiser education requirement and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass our H.R. 2852 as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And homebuyer assistance included in this measure now being voted on here in the U.S. House. The last vote expected today. After votes, members are scheduled to hold a moment of silence to honor the victims of the tragedy in El Paso, Texas last month. And then tomorrow, debate on the 3 measures that would ban oil and gas drilling in Alaska and along the U.S. coasts.
On this vote, the yeas are 419 and the nays are 5. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The House will be in order. There we go. The House will be in order. Are they? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House, and I invite all members to join me in the well who wish to stand in support with members of the Texas and Congressional Hispanic Caucus delegations.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, on Saturday, August 3rd, at a local El Paso Walmart, parents were shopping for school supplies, elderly couples were paying for their groceries, and kids and parents were fundraising for their soccer team. But that day, everything changed. A killer drove over 600 miles to my community. He massacred 22 people and injured another 26. He confessed to driving over 10 hours so that he could target Mexicans and immigrants. It was a horrific act of domestic terrorism fueled by America's gun violence epidemic and the hate epidemic. The killer's screed was filled with bigoted anti-immigrant language that has been used by people in power and those with the most powerful bully pulpits. El Paso, as usual, rose to the challenge before us. We grieved together. We went to the hospital together. We prayed together. We buried loved ones together. My community has a long journey ahead, and I thank the first responders, healthcare providers, spiritual leaders, and all the community members who have shown tremendous courage during our darkest moment. I thank my colleagues and people from all over the country and the world who reached out to us, sent their condolences, visited with us. El Paso will continue to set the example for the nation because we will continue to treat all people in our midst with kindness, generosity, and goodwill. We will always be El Paso strong, and our resilience will guide the way. I ask for your continued support, but more importantly, I ask that this awful event be the turning point that our country so desperately needs and that Americans so desperately want. We must end the hate and gun violence epidemics because for many of us, these issues have become a matter of life and death. I ask that all members and guests in the gallery rise for a moment of silence, please. Back.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
August 31st. The victims were Mary Granados, Lila Hernandez, Edwin Peregrino, Joe Griffin, Rodolfo Julio Arco, Cameron Cartless Brown, and Ruel Garcia. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for prayer, asking for peace, that passes understanding on the men and women in Odessa, Texas, and the families of the suffering. We ask you to wrap your loving arms around them at this dark hour in their lives. Thank you, dear Heavenly Father. We ask these things in Jesus' name. I'd also like to recognize the law enforcement officers and first responders of Midland and Odessa who acted quickly and courageously in their response to this tragedy. We owe these brave men and women more gratitude than words can express. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Mike?
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent that my name be removed as a co-sponsor from H.R. 2407.
Without objection, so ordered.
Your people.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to remove myself as a co-sponsor from H.R. 838.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today I rise in support of the Coastal and Marine Economies Protection Act and the Protecting and Securing Florida's Coastline Act. It is estimated that 11% of Florida's plant species and 883 vertebrate and invertebrate species are endemic to our state. Florida has 114 federally endangered or threatened species as our community. The Florida Reef is the third largest reef in the world and the only living coral reef in the continental United States. Florida's unique ecosystem is too delicate to put at risk to the hazards of the drilling process. Offshore drilling puts our tourism industry and fishing industry at risk, two of the biggest factors in our economy here in Florida. Drilling should never take priority over keeping our ecosystems healthy or our fishermen's jobs. It is time to put the health and the well-being of our community over the greed of corporate polluters.
Does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I rise to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Boy Scout Troop 578, one of the oldest troops in our nation. Troop 578 was chartered on September 11th, 1919, by the First Church of Evans in Derby, New York. Historically, they were known as Troop 78. And unlike any other Boy Scout troop in America, they remained active during World War II. During that war, these scouts were official dispatch bearers, and they collected recycled metals and other goods to support the war effort. In the 1950s, redistricting changes required the troop to add a number 5 to the 78, making them Troop 578 as they are known today. As an Eagle Scout myself, I am proud to honor Troop 578 as they continue to be an important part of Western New York community and scouting history. I wish Troop 578 many more active years of scouting. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we've seen how climate change has made natural disasters such as hurricanes, tornadoes, more frequent and much more severe. This is not the time to debate climate change. This is the time to act on it. And the best time to act, the best time to prepare for natural disasters is before they occur. September is National Preparedness Month. It is the perfect time to celebrate the brave men and women who respond when crisis happens, and the perfect time to coordinate our emergency response efforts. We need to be ready for the next emergency before it strikes. As chairman of the Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Subcommittee in Homeland Security, I want FEMA and other federal agencies to have the power and resources to coordinate relief efforts before, during, and after an emergency happens. We do not have to relive the horrors of Hurricane Andrew, Katrina, and Maria. Let us be proactive about the next disaster instead of waiting until it strikes. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our nation's economic prosperity and national security interests are secured due to the energy-rich districts like Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District. That's why during the recent August District Work Month, while in Montrose, Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, I visited Cabot Oil and Gas, one of Pennsylvania's largest natural gas producers. On any given day, Pennsylvania's 12th District is well positioned to help make the United States a net energy exporter by producing as much as 10% of the country's natural gas. Equally important is the great partner energy producers have made with local governments and educational institutions. As a member of the House Education and Labor Committee, I know the importance of bringing industry and education together to enhance workforce development, especially in rural areas. That is why it made me proud to see Cabot partnering with Lackawanna College's School of Petroleum and Natural Gas as a means to provide career-ready job skills in the natural gas industry. Thanks to this partnership, students are able to make family-sustaining wages and have a career in an industry that will remain in Pennsylvania for generations. Congress should use this example set in Susquehanna County and by energy producers throughout Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District for how partnerships with private sector job creators can lead to a better future. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The New Jersey Fringe Festival is hosted by the local Eagle Theater in Hamilton in southern New Jersey. The festival is a driver in the cultural boom taking place in this town. The Eagle Theater is South Jersey's only year-round professional equity theater and is dedicating to redefining regional theater through innovation, enlightenment, production, techniques, and the development of eclectic theatrics. The Eagle Theater originally opened its doors in 1914, and it was a silent movie theater and was a playhouse from 1914 until 1944. Since then, the theater has built itself to be an award-winning, culturally diverse epicenter, boasting state-of-the-art technical equipment and hosting a core of theming artists dedicated to experimental storytelling through medium advancing technology. It enriches South Jersey culturally and creatively, and I commend them for what they do. South Jersey is proud of them, New Jersey is proud of them, and the United States of America is proud of them. Congratulations, and I thank you, Madam Speaker, and yield back the rest of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Mr. Bill Lewis, who retired on Monday, August 12th, after nearly 40 years working in the Chatham County judicial system. Chatham County's Chief Assistant Public Defender, Mr. Lewis, found his calling in 1980 after trying out a number of other careers first. The combination of helping people while also being able to stand up, arguing in the courtroom, drew him to the career. And it paid off. In his own words, Mr. Lewis loved every day of his job, and he liked defending people's freedom rather than fighting over their money. But it also paid off for Chatham County because of Mr. Lewis's exceptional reputation for being a calming voice in the courtroom and his care of his clients. During his tenure, he earned some of the most prestigious awards in the Savannah area, the Robbie Robinson Award for his success in public defense, and the Thomas More Award for his religious affiliation and commitment to humanity. Mr. Lewis, thank you for your service to our community. Your work will be missed. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as my colleagues and I come back into legislative session this week, I'd like to take this opportunity to share what I learned from the 12th District of Georgia during the recent district work period. Like many of my colleagues, I spent the last 6 weeks meeting with constituents, and I hope my colleagues got the same earful I did. Our constituents want to know why Congress can't work together to deliver results for the American people. In fact, just last night, I hosted a telephone town hall, and constituents said that the two top issues they want Congress to focus on before the end of the year are health care and immigration reform. So how do we solve these problems when Democrats are determined to ensure that our president is not successful? It is not fair for the American people to put politics ahead of the American people's interest. We have a president who is willing and eager to work with us on many issues, including health care and immigration. So let's get to work. The American people won't accept anything less. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to announce a bill I recently introduced in the House, the Protecting Patients from Surprise Medical Bills Act, which is a companion bill to Senator Scott's recent legislation. No one seeking medical care should ever have to worry about incurring unexpected, crippling expenses, especially when they've done everything right by obtaining health insurance. That's why then Governor Rick Scott and I worked to pass a bill in Florida to solve this issue. This law takes patients completely out of the billing process, protecting patients from surprise medical bills for emergency services and for mistakenly seeking or seeing an out-of-network healthcare provider at an in-network hospital. This bill has experienced widespread success in Florida, which is why we are introducing legislation to apply these policies to healthcare plans regulated at the federal level. I've personally known the fear of being rushed to the emergency room. And in that moment, no one should have to worry about their finances. This bill not only seeks to save Americans money, but also provides the peace of mind for them to focus on healing. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the community development and revitalization efforts of Clarion, Pennsylvania. Recently, I was back in my district touring Clarion's growing downtown region, meeting with small business owners and community leaders. And the progress and the growth that I saw was truly exciting. In 2015, Clarion was selected as a blueprint community. It's an initiative through the FHL Bank, Pittsburgh, that seeks to revitalize older communities and neighborhoods. One of the shining stars of the Blueprint program is the Clarion River Brewing Company, and I'm proud of their continued success as one of the many exciting small businesses in town. But Clarion's blueprint included more than new businesses. It also outlines a plan to increase affordable housing options for current and future residents. These blueprints don't offer one-size-fits-all plans for community development. Instead, that works with local leaders to better understand the needs of their residents to create custom, homegrown solutions that breathe new life into older communities. Madam Speaker, I'm excited to see what Clarion has in store, and I'm proud for its and I'm rooting for its continued success. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Rise and extend our remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to congratulate the University of Texas at Dallas on 50 years of educating students in North Texas. In 1969, Texas Governor Preston Smith signed legislation to officially establish the University of Texas at Dallas as part of the UT system. Not only has UT grown immensely in the last 50 years, but our community takes great pride in the university's Tier 1 status. Today, UTD offers over 140 degrees, helps young people follow their dreams by providing them with a top-notch education. What was once vast prairie land has become a hub of higher learning and an opportunity
for students to learn across the country. I ask my colleagues to join me in congratulating the University of Texas at Dallas on a wonderful 5 days of academic excellence. Whoosh.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2019, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm proud to join my colleagues in the Democratic Women's Caucus in hosting this special order hour to raise awareness of the damage done by mandatory arbitration and our support for H.R. 1423, the Forced Arbitration Injustice Repeal Act, or as we refer to it, the FAIR Act. We're pleased that the Judiciary Committee is holding a markup on this bill as we speak. What is stunning about this issue is that a recent study found you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to win an arbitration case. In fact, a 5-year study found that of 6,000 claims that were made on arbitration clauses, money awards were provided in only 137 cases. Today, my colleagues will read accounts from just some of the women who have experienced this miscarriage of justice firsthand. Over 60 million workers are subject to forced arbitration, but even those staggering numbers fail to fully illustrate the suffering and human plight caused by mandatory arbitration. Today, we share the experiences of women fighting back against the silence and shame, and join me in demanding systemic change so that all workers are treated with dignity and respect that they deserve. Sterling Jewelers, known to many of us as Jared Jewelers or K Jewelers. Diane Akampora. Perhaps no company better exemplifies the harm caused by mandatory arbitration than Sterling Jewelers. In April 2019, the New York Times Magazine published a story on the ongoing decade-long pay and promotion lawsuit against Sterling Jewelers, which at one point included nearly 70,000 women. These stories should outrage each of us. Diane of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, said that after 5 years at K Jewelers and 6 years of experience at another store, she made $2 to $4 less per hour than her more recently hired, lesser experienced male colleagues. According to the investigation, when she was promoted to manager, she attended the company's annual managers meeting in Florida. On a shuttle bus back to the resort, she was pulled onto the lap of a manager who held her tightly and fondled her. At the same meeting, a district manager tried to kiss her. At a later meeting, she had to leave a hot tub because discussion turned uncomfortably sexual. She was later told that the hot tub scene turned into an orgy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is Amanda Berger, a sales associate who made her way up to assistant manager, who, after 5 years of employment, complained that she was still making her starting salary, but was brushed off by her manager, who watched the new guy, who previously worked at a kiosk for cell phone covers, be promoted ahead of her, who dared to complain to HR after her district manager invited her to Chili's with a few other managers, and while they were eating, texted her from across the table with, quote, "I want to come on your tits," unquote. Marie Wolf's manager didn't seem to like her despite the fact that she was a top salesperson at Jared. She didn't have the Jared look, the manager told a colleague. Marie was tall and wore pants and blouses, not short skirt suits. She also wore little makeup. One day, Marie asked for a raise, and the manager told her she was already making more than any other salesperson in the store. Not surprisingly, that was far from the truth. Or Tammy Zenner, who was called Texas Tammy by her colleagues because of the size of her breasts, and who complained to her store manager that an executive visiting the store had rubbed himself against her from behind, but was told when she complained that she should be flattered. The culture of rampant gender discrimination, pay inequity, and sexual harassment at Sterling is the stuff of living nightmares suffered by so many working women, many of whom are the primary, if not only, breadwinner for their families. Diane, Amanda, Marie, and Tammy are just 4 of nearly 70,000 women who have at some point joined the lawsuit against Sterling. And Sterling was able to hide the details of these allegations from its shareholders and from the public because all their employees are forced to sign a forced arbitration agreement upon being hired. That means all work-related disputes had to go through Sterling's in-house dispute resolution system, effectively gagging employees and destroying any chance of positive change. It also undoubtedly resulted in countless other women facing similar types of abuse and discrimination. And that's why the experience of these women are so important for us to hear, so that Congress will pass the FAIR Act. It is unacceptable that millions of employees are subjected to a system that forces them to settle disputes through mandatory arbitration, where the company can control the process and shroud the outcome in secrecy. I urge my colleagues to support the FAIR Act and strike a blow in the fight for fairness and transparency. No one should have to suffer harassment, assault, and degradation in silence in order to support themselves and their families and pursue their career dreams. Every Kiss Begins with Kay Jewelers should be a jingle, not a job requirement. When couples are shopping for wedding rings, I hope they stay away from retail jewelers that treat women like sex toys or second-class citizens. I now recognize my great colleague from the state of New York, Carolyn Maloney, who is one of the architects of the Equal Rights Amendment.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for all of her hard work on the Equal Rights Amendment and standing up and fighting for women. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to join my colleagues of the Democratic Women's Caucus to emphasize the importance of passing H.R. 23, the FAIR Act for women in the workplace. I applaud the work of the author, Hank Johnson, who has authored this legislation and in some cases have worked with constituents over 14 years that are involved in forced arbitration settlements that seem never to be settled. But statistics say that if they are settled, usually the woman loses. I might say that the Judiciary Committee is marking up this bill right now as we speak. I hope it comes to the floor. We should have a strong bipartisan support for this injustice and to pass the FAIR bill. Forced arbitration is a trap. Binding a victim of workplace misconduct to arbitration, particularly anyone subjected to harassment or discrimination, is just plain wrong. Forced arbitration denies survivors a fair shot at justice. In fact, most employees do not even know they have entered into such an agreement until an incident occurs. So not only has a person been harassed or had their rights violated at work, but now the employer gets to dictate how the matter is settled. How fair is that? I want to recognize a woman present in the gallery this evening who knows all too well the deficiencies of forced arbitration agreements. Karen Ward is a distinguished former partner at the New York accounting firm of Ernst & Young, which is refusing to let her take her sexual harassment case to a public courtroom because of a forced arbitration contract clause. Not only is this unfair, it's expensive. As Ms. Ward has told us, she has already spent $185,000 to arbitrate her claims because of a provision in her contract that requires her to split the cost of the dispute resolution. Ernst & Young and other firms with similar employment contract terms claim that forced arbitration is more efficient and streamlined. They don't tell you that the process is hidden from the public, that people can't see it, it's not transparent, and they don't tell you how secrecy surrounding arbitration settlements only helps perpetuate the problem of harassment or discrimination in the workplace, and it is costly emotionally and financially. as her case illustrates with the $158,000 cost so far. Ms. Ward has said that she hasn't heard, that she's heard from dozens of women bound by arbitration agreements. And she said, quote, this is her quote, "They see that the cost can cause financial ruin and they choose to live with injustice," end quote. In other words, the system is built like a wall against the rights of women, costing them out of the process, making it totally unfair to them. Under-reporting and secretive settlements have roles in creating and cementing a culture of harassment in the workplace. Passing the FAIR Act is an important step toward empowering all employees to report workplace misconduct and retain the option of seeking the remedy that they so choose. And it creates an incentive for every employer to focus on preventing these incidents before they occur, not try to conceal them case by case, knowing that it'll never reach the light of day and that the employees will never win. There is no incentive to even bring a case for justice. So Mrs. Ward's fight has shown a light on this disturbing and unfair corporate behavior, and I am proud to fight alongside her and with my like-minded colleagues in the Women's Caucus and in Congress to change this and to support and pass the FAIR Act. I yield back to my colleague Jackie Spear and thank her for her leadership on this issue and so many others.
I thank the gentlelady from New York. It's now my pleasure to yield time to my good friend and colleague from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, who also has spent a great deal of time working on this issue of forced arbitration as it relates to sexual harassment.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Congresswoman Spear out of California, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise also today in support of the FAIR Act and to bring an end to the secret arbitration process that silences victims of harassment and discrimination. This is a fight that we have been waging for years now. It's about doing the right thing and giving a voice to women like Jasmine Edwards. Jasmine is an African-American woman who was a co-manager of a Guess retail store. When she began there, she came to the store with 15 years of retail experience and was promised that she would be promoted to manager shortly. But then the harassment started. Her boss instructed the women at the store to dress sexier. He regularly made racist and sexist comments about employees and about customers. He'd stare at female customers and then share his observations with Jasmine. He would continuously make offensive remarks about African Americans and would claim they'd be more likely to steal from the store. And he even segregated employees by shift. His behavior was so concerning that even the customers noticed this and began complaining about him. Jasmine voiced her concerns about her manager's behavior, but rather than taking her seriously, she was retaliated against and she was accused of theft. There was no investigation of those claims against her. She was bullied, and eventually the stress was too much to handle, and so Jasmine had to resign. But she wasn't done fighting. She found an attorney, and she filed a complaint in court. But this clothing company, again, Guess retailer, now says the case must be sent to arbitration. Why? Because on one of her first days at the retailer, the company says that Jasmine agreed to arbitrate any disputes. And of course, the arbitration agreement requires her to stay silent about what happened. And under the arbitration agreement, it is the company-funded arbitrator who gets to decide what type of evidence there would be. And I would ask anybody here, what kind of justice is that? It will be no surprise to you that Jasmine would rather have an impartial judge hear her case, wouldn't we all? But that is not something she will likely be allowed to get. That is why we need to pass the FAIR Act now, because we've had enough. No more looking the other way when powerful men use their position of authority to victimize women. No more excuses for abusers just because of their status, their position, or their gender. No more telling women to stay silent or to get over it. No more. With that, I yield back to my friend, Congresswoman Jackie Spear.
I thank the gentlelady from Illinois. I now recognize my good friend and colleague from the East Bay and great advocate for equal rights, Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you, Congresswoman Spear, for calling us together to speak on behalf of these courageous women and for your tireless work on their behalf, but also on behalf of women throughout the world. Thank you so much. Today, I join my colleagues in standing in support of the FAIR Act and in solidarity with women like Saturnina Placencia, a Latina single mother of 4 who was working for $13 an hour in a dollar store in New York. Now, her general manager subjected her to frequent sexual harassment, and after she refused his sexual demands, she alleged she was given fewer hours than new female hires. And when she told him she was pregnant, he angrily responded, "The baby could have been mine." Sadly, Saturnina did not realize when she started work that she had signed a mandatory arbitration agreement, and her case is now in arbitration. Her attorney noted that New York passed a law that would have allowed Saturnina to take her case to court, but the law was struck down based on the Federal Arbitration Act. So Saturnina is forced to arbitrate her claims. Her case is supported by the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which is housed and administered by the National Women's Law Center Fund. Forced arbitration is just what it says. It's forced. So let's pass the FAIR Act so women will finally have the justice that they so deserve. Enough is enough. Thank you, Congresswoman Spear, for allowing us to give voice to these injustices. And hopefully these women soon, because of you, because of the FAIR Act, will be able to move forward with their lives. Thank you again.
I thank the gentlelady from California again for your outstanding leadership. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of our new colleagues, but not new to fighting on behalf of women, Congresswoman Katie Hill from California.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Spear. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on such an important issue. I'm here today to support the FAIR Act because of women like Kelly Stein, who earlier this year wrote a public letter to the Senate Finance Committee telling the story of her mother, June Lee. In the letter, Kelly details how June was severely abused in a nursing home. The letter describes how her mother was dropped several times by staff members and sustained a broken shoulder. The injury took 5 days before it was x-rayed. Because staff failed to check on her enough, June developed bed sores. She suffered countless urinary tract infections because the nursing home staff would not take her to the bathroom enough. Nursing home staff even taped the nurse call cord, the cord that she needed to call for help, out of her reach so that they would not have to attend to her. Kelly recounts how throughout the entire time her mother was there, it was a never-ending ordeal of preventable health problem after preventable health problem, chipping away at her dignity as well as her mental and physical health. Ultimately, the physical neglect caused her mental and physical health to suffer, and it greatly diminished her quality of life. But when June's family tried to hold the nursing home accountable, they realized that they had unknowingly signed away their rights to hold that nursing home corporation accountable for June's abuse and neglect. They'd been forced to sign an arbitration agreement as a condition of June being admitted to the nursing home. The FAIR Act would eliminate forced arbitration clauses in employment, consumer, and civil rights cases, and would allow consumers and workers to agree to arbitration only after a dispute occurs. This legislation protects older Americans who rely on the care of nursing home staff by allowing families to hold nursing homes accountable for the abuse or neglect of their loved ones. Thank you so much.
I thank the gentlelady from California. I now will yield to the Congresswoman from Florida, the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, Congresswoman Lois Frank.
Thank you, Congressman Spear. It's great to be with you today. I thought maybe we could have some sort of a colloquy. Oh, okay. You look like you're up to it, right?
Of course I'm up to it.
First of all, I want to thank you for your leadership, and I also know that Representative Hank Johnson has also been involved with the FAIR Act. And first I want to just make a statement. Forced arbitration deprives men and women, not just the women, but men, of fundamental legal protections, and also prevents, this is important, it prevents the public from knowing about the harm often that corporations create with the secrecy of arbitration. So I'm very pleased to join you in supporting the Forced Arbitration Injustice Repeal Act, or FAIR Act. So, I want to talk to you about a woman named Lily, but I want to read this to you. This is an advertisement from a massage spa that Lily went to. And she said, this is what it says: "The world is out to get you. Thankfully, we got you. Stress can take a toll on your body, and even though your body works hard to keep it up, it needs help. Keeping your body running efficiently should be high on your to-do list, and regular massage is a key to operating at peak efficiency. Keeping your body in optimal working condition with routine massage, along with rapid tension relief and total body stretch, is easy at any Massage Envy franchise location." Now, I would assume you would agree it's pretty appealing.
Actually, no, it's not. Sounds like someone talking about repairing one's car, but yeah.
But anyway, this is the advertisement. We got your back, and the fact of the matter is, as I said, the world's out to get you, and thankfully we got you. And they did get Lily, who I'm here to talk about today, because on her visit to Massage Envy Spa, she was sexually assaulted. And first she tried to get. It's one of these things you sign up and get a series. So first she tried to get out, and she had to get the app, and she tried to cancel her membership, which she wasn't even allowed to do because in the little fine line it said you have to go to arbitration. So
will the gentlelady
yes,
yield?
I yield.
So this is a consumer who went to get a package of 3 massages at Massage Envy,
right,
signed up for it, then decided she didn't want to do it and didn't read the fine print that said she had to go to arbitration.
Right. And she didn't want to go back because she was sexually assaulted. And so we're not talking about obviously she could make a criminal claim, but she wanted to actually get out of having to continue to pay Massage Envy. And she is just an example, literally, of many women this has happened to. There was a investigation. There are about 1,200 franchises, these franchises across the country, and BuzzFeed did an investigation, and they found that there were about more than 180 women who had been sexually assaulted at these spas. Now think about this. Aside from the criminal consequences, which obviously there must be, the company does not want to let you out of your contract unless they force you to arbitration. And maybe you could explain again why forced arbitration is really so contrary to our system of justice.
Well, because there is no justice. Oftentimes, as we've pointed out, these arbitration claims end up benefiting the company as opposed to the individual. So few of them actually result in claims being paid out to the consumer or the employee who was impacted by it. So once again, it's a buyer beware, employee beware, because it is set up not for fairness, but to protect the employer or the retailer in the case that you pointed out.
Is it true that in many of these arbitration cases that the company actually gets to choose the arbitrator, and then the arbitrator, it's the same arbitrator, and then what's the implications of that?
Well, again, the lack of fairness, because that particular arbitrator is chosen each time. That arbitrator is probably chosen because he or she finds in favor of the company, and the result is that fairness is thrown out the window.
And obviously the arbitrator wants to be rehired, and so the power is in the employer. And I think it's important to know, and I think we can help. We've been talking today about instances of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, but what people should know is that these arbitration agreements touch almost every part of our life. For example, you go into a doctor's office,
a doctor's office. I'm about to tell a story about a nursing home. Here is a patient in a nursing home who gets violated, and then there is this arbitration clause that prevents any kind of relief for that particular person who is a client at the nursing home. So it really does impact virtually every aspect of every contract you sign, every app that you sign up for.
So what this means, just sort of in practical terms, we always think is that if we are harmed or we are wronged, that we should have our day in court where a judge or a jury can hear evidence publicly and decide the case. But really what we have now, this system, I call the system of injustice, is with this forced arbitration that's secret, that is really weighed towards the corporation.
That's correct. It could, without being harsh here, it's rigged. You are not necessarily, in all likelihood, going to get a fair hearing. You're not going to have someone who's independent. Oftentimes they're employed by, selected by the corporation. And the result is, as you pointed out, that they want to be rehired again. So they find reasons to be supportive of the corporation and not the individual.
And again, just to emphasize, this involves, maybe you can give some examples of how this results in a cover-up of wrongdoing that really keeps other people, whether they are employees or consumers, from being protected.
That's absolutely correct. And it's really important for us to make the public aware that whether you know it or not, you are probably signing these arbitration clauses every time you sign up for a particular program, particular service, or you are being employed by a specific company.
And let me just, one more point that I just want you, if you could emphasize again. When you go into arbitration, does it cost the consumer or the employee money?
Oftentimes it does. In one of the cases that our colleague from New York reflected on, it was costing her hundreds of thousands of dollars. In this case, I'm going to speak about the patient, the client at the nursing home, had to pay the money, some $3,000, for the rental of the room in which the arbitration took place. So it's like a double slap in the face.
So before I let you get on with your next story, could you just re-emphasize again exactly what this legislation will do?
This legislation, and again, they're marking it up right now in the Judiciary Committee, is going to return to the consumer, return to the employee, the opportunity to not sign a forced arbitration agreement when they are at the most vulnerable position, typically when they are being hired or when they're requesting a service and not frankly knowing that the arbitration clause is there.
Well, I think you're going to will bring a lot of justice to people all over the country, and I want to thank you for your leadership, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Florida. I'm going to end, Madam Speaker, with two cases because they're both egregious in their own right. One is about Irene Morissette, an 87-year-old Catholic nun. Now think about this for a minute. An 87-year-old Catholic nun was raped in her nursing home near Birmingham, Alabama. Police and medical records revealed a brutal attack. Quote, police investigators found 2 semen stains in Morissette's bed and blood on the inside rear area of her green and pink flowered pajama bottoms, which had been shoved underneath the mattress, unquote. Equally alarming was the article recalls how the medical examiner later wrote that Miss Morissette was afraid to call anyone because she was afraid the assailant would be the one to come back to her room. Ms. Morissette told police in an interview several days after the attack that she felt like, quote, a piece of trash, unquote, because she had honored her vow of chastity for over 6 decades and had lost something she had valued for her entire life. That one really breaks my heart. Due to a forced arbitration clause in the admissions contract she signed when she was admitted, Ms. Morissette was left with no choice. Her family could not pursue their claim in a public court of law, but was rather forced into arbitration. In the forced arbitration proceedings, the arbitrator invented outlandish arguments of hearsay and conjecture, including claims that Ms. Morissette did not appear, quote, upset enough, unquote, about the rape for it to be believable. Now, mind you, there is evidence. There is DNA evidence. Ms. Morissette lost, and as a final insult, received a bill for $3,000 to cover the cost of the room rental for the forced arbitration proceedings. No nursing home resident or family should ever have to go through what Ms. Morissette endured. That is why we are calling this particular piece of legislation, the FAIR Act, and urging a vote on the House floor. One last story that I would like to tell is of Rosette Pambakian. Ms. Pambakian was a senior executive at the dating app Tinder. She was one of the earliest hires and the longest-standing female executive at Tinder, writing their very first press release. She was the head of marketing and communications, ran a department of more than 40 employees, and served as the face of the brand on panels and in the press. Ms. Pambakian had sued her former employer for sexual harassment and assault. Now, Tinder is one of those dating apps. According to her lawsuit, former Match Group and Tinder CEO Gregory Blatt assaulted Ms. Pambakian in 2016 at the Tinder holiday party. Blatt made a lewd overture to her, saying that he got a hard on every time I look at you. And let's get out of here, unquote. Pambakian left the party and went to a colleague's hotel room with another coworker. Later in the night, Blake showed up. According to the lawsuit, he began forcibly groping her breasts and upper thighs and kissing her shoulders, neck, and chest without her consent in front of other subordinates. A meaningful investigation of the assault, which was required under company policies and California law, never happened. Pambakian alleges she was never even interviewed. Instead, she claims she was marginalized, subjected to additional harassing and offensive behavior, put on administrative leave, publicly accused of consenting to advances, calling it consensual cuddling, and finally wrongfully terminated. The lawsuit further alleges the IAC and Match tried to buy Ms. Pambakian's silence following the assault by offering her a higher salary and more stock options on the condition that she sign a non-disclosure agreement. She declined. According to her attorney, Rosette is bringing this action not only to right the personal wrong against her, but to stand with the many women in the tech industry and beyond who have been blamed and shamed into submission or silence, unquote. Match and Blatt have filed a motion to have the case sent to arbitration, even though Ms. Pambakian was forced to sign an arbitration agreement after the assault and after she rejected the proposed NDA. Her pursuit of justice is ongoing. I now would like to have time offered to Congresswoman Schakowsky, the gentlelady from Illinois, who will also be telling a story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate my colleagues setting up this special order to talk about something that is so incredibly important and often not really brought to the surface. I'm here today to join my colleagues in support for the FAIR Act because I don't believe that victims of racial discrimination should be forced into a secretive process in which they have no access to justice and accountability. And this is especially important to me because of the story of two Floridians, Glenda and Peter Perez. Both worked for Cigna until forced arbitration absolutely ruined their lives. As reported by Business Insider, everything was going well. And, quote, they were living in a newly built home in Ruskin, Florida, happily raising their 3 kids, unquote. That's what they say about themselves. But due to forced arbitration, things turned for the worst. 2 years ago, Glenda, who is Latinx, was fired after she was reporting racial discrimination unknown to her, buried in the fine print of the employment agreement she signed along with other onboarding documents when she was first hired, was forced arbitration clause. So Glenda had no choice but to go into forced arbitration proceedings. But as the article notes, quote, instead of the simple and fair process that arbitration promises, Perez saw her claim dismissed without so much as a hearing, only to later learn that her apparently independent arbitrator was so friendly with the attorney representing Cigna that the arbitrator invited him to his 50th birthday party. And, to no surprise, the arbitrator sided with Glenda's employer, Cigna, when her husband Peter complained about the unfairness of the process and how the arbitrator truly was not independent. Guess what? He too was fired. Now Glenda and Peter are struggling to support themselves and their 3 children and trying to fight their wrongful termination in court. No worker should ever have to go through what Glenda and Peter have endured. This is why I support ending forced arbitration by voting for the FAIR Act, and I want to urge all of my colleagues who care about justice, who care about fairness, to support the FAIR Act. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady from Illinois, and as she said at the end, she is one of the loudest voices to make sure there's justice in this country. Madam Speaker, with that, we could tell many more stories tonight, but I am going to close now by thanking all of my colleagues from the Democratic Women's Caucus for sharing the stories of women and men who are hurt by forced arbitration and demonstrating the human impact of this corrupt and abusive practice. We are eager to have the House of Representatives take a vote on the FAIR Act on the House floor because survivors deserve their day in court, workers deserve dignified and respectful workplaces. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Members are reminded to refrain from references to guests in the gallery. The chair lays before the House message.
To the Congress of the United States, Pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the National Emergencies Act, the United Nations Participation Act of 1945, and Section 301 of Title III United States Code, and in view of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1373 of September 28, 2001, Resolution 1526 of January 30, 2004, Resolution 1988 of June 17, 2011, Resolution 1989 of June 17, 2011, Resolution 2253 of December 17, 2015, Resolution 2255 of December 21, 2015, and Resolution 2368 of July 20, 2017, and Resolution 2462 of March 28, 2019, I hereby report that I have issued an executive order modernizing sanctions to combat terrorism. I have determined that it is necessary to consolidate and enhance sanctions to combat acts of terrorism and threats of terrorism by foreign terrorists, acts that are recognized and condemned in the above referenced United Nations Security Council resolutions. I have terminated the national emergency declared in Executive Order 12947 of January 23, 1995, and revoked Executive Order 12947 as amended by Executive Order 13099 of August 20, 1998. The order builds upon the initial steps taken in Executive Order 12947 and takes additional steps to deal with the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13224 of September 23, 2001, with respect to the continuing and immediate threat of grave acts of terrorism and threats of terrorism committed by foreign terrorists, which include acts of terrorism that threaten the Middle East peace process. I am enclosing a copy of the order I have issued. Signed, Donald J. Trump, the White House, September 9, 2019.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2019, the Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 30 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know which one. I come to the floor this afternoon because of the importance of a coming date. It'll be known as a historic date in the Congress of the United States, Thursday, September the 19th, which is the day that it is not the floor, it is the committee, prerequisite to coming to the floor, that the Committee on Oversight and Reform will hold the first hearing on D.C. statehood, H.R. 51, in 26 years. That will be a historic hearing. This is not an informational hearing to let us know about statehood. It is a jurisdictional hearing, the prerequisite to going to the House floor. It will mean that the residents of the District of Columbia, who are number one, mark that fact, number one in taxes paid to support the government of the United States, and yet do not have full rights, the same rights as other Americans. Yes, I can come to the House floor to speak anytime I want to. And yes, with Democrats in power, I have reclaimed the committee of the whole vote, which means that when the committee is gathered here in the House, voting on at least some matters, I get to vote. But on final votes, I cannot vote, even though, as you have heard, the people I represent contribute more federal taxes than any people in the United States. I mean, more per capita than New York and California and Florida. You name the state, you will be talking about a state where per capita its residents contribute less to support the very government that is ours and theirs than the people of the District of Columbia. And so, yes, I have introduced the D.C. statehood bill. Let me predict right now that that bill will pass. It has virtually enough co-sponsors to pass. Most bills come to this House floor without many co-sponsors, and yet you know they will pass. Well, when you have almost enough co-sponsors to pass the bill, I say to my good friends who are on the bill, not on the bill, this is the time to get on the bill so that you will be part of history. And I do believe this bill will, in fact, pass the House of Representatives. There has already been a forecast that that will happen. That forecast was in H.R. 1, which has already passed the House. Every Democratic member voted for H.R. 1. Well, H.R. 1 contained findings for D.C. statehood. It found that the district residents pay the highest taxes per capita, that residents of your nation's capital have fulfilled all of the obligations of statehood, fighting in all the nation's wars, including the war that gave rise to the United States of America itself. It found that there were no historical or constitutional or financial or economic reasons why the 700,000 residents of your nation's capital should not become part of a state. These are findings in H.R. 1 that every Democrat has already voted for. These were findings for statehood for the District of Columbia. It found that the district is one of the strongest fiscal positions in the United States, $14.6 billion budget, a surplus of $2.8 billion, total personnel income higher than that of 7 states, per capita personal consumption expenditures higher than those of any state, total personal consumption expenditures greater than those of 7 states. And we're not talking about an entity not worthy of statehood. The qualifications are clear, and there are qualifications to become a state. How do you become a state? You get voted a state by majority vote on this House. It's hard to become the state, but those qualifications have been met. Let us compare the District of Columbia to states that are already states. Let's take 2 states of the Union, Vermont and Wyoming. I begrudge them nothing, except to say they have voting members of the House and the Senate, and yet they don't have as many residents as the District of Columbia. This graph goes only to 600,000. Hell, we're at 700,000 D.C. residents. Moreover, it should be said that there are 7 states in the Union about the same size, less than 1 million voters, and yet they have 2 senators and a voting member of the House. There just is no reason to deny that same right to the residents of your nation's capital. The authority, the authorities that indicate that our bill is constitutional are the ones we always look to find out whether a bill is constitutional. The Congressional Research Service has found that H.R. 51 is constitutional. The American Civil Liberties Union, the foremost authority on constitutional rights, has done a study and have found that H.R. 51 is constitutional. And importantly, Viet Dinh, a conservative legal scholar who served as the highest-ranking Justice Department official in the George W. Bush administration, because he was Assistant Attorney General for Legal Policy. Viet Dinh has done a study and found that H.R. 51 is constitutional. Do note that 51, it has real meaning because the district would become the 51st state. The findings mean that this House has already voted for H.R. 51 because it's voted for all the findings that are necessary for the district to become a state. Now, there's a Senate version of H.R. 1, but the Senate version doesn't have all of the many propositions that H.R. 1 has. H.R. 1, yes, has findings saying essentially that the district should be the 51st state. But H.R. 1 has a lot of other things in it. H.R. 1 says that to enhance democracy, and that's what it is, it's an omnibus democracy-enhancing bill. That's why our findings for D.C. statehood are in that bill. But it's got things like wants paper ballots to protect the infrastructure, which sometimes goes down if there is, for example, a cyber attack. It's got donor disclosure requirements, expanding early voting, no gerrymandering. President and vice president would have to disclose their tax returns. Those are seen as democracy enhancing, and I fully endorse them. But compare that to the findings endorsing statehood, which would mean that 700,000 American citizens would have the same rights as every other citizen. And you will see why H.R. 1 is very important to the District of Columbia, and why we predict that H.R. 51, the D.C. statehood bill, will pass the Congress, the House of Representatives. I do want to stress the full qualifications. And one of the most important is service in the armed forces. Not only do the residents of the District of Columbia pay the highest taxes per capita in the United States, federal taxes, but the residents of the nation's capital have served in every war, including the war that gave rise to the nation itself. This is a particular poignant poster because it shows the major wars, the World War wars. And notice what the losses have been of residents of the nation's capital who fought and died for their country without the same rights as others in their country. World War I, more casualties, 635 casualties from the district, more than from 3 states. The Korean War, more than from 8 states. World War II, more casualties than from 4 other states. And of course, Vietnam, more casualties than from 10 states. No, I've done that one. Thank you. The casualties of war perhaps speak loudest to our struggle for equality. There is a war memorial, the only war memorial on the Mall. And it's there because the district lost so many men, and it didn't have home rule at all. What is home rule? Home rule is simply a government with a legislature and an executive. The district was ruled from this place, from the Capitol. So, to commemorate our war dead after World War I, the Congress placed a pristine, beautiful monument, the only monument to a single jurisdiction you will find on the Mall. People go there, sometimes they go there to get married. They go there because it's beautiful and not terribly elaborate. It's called the D.C. War Memorial. 400 and so names of men and women who died in World War I actually carved out in that memorial. That's why our service in the armed services is so important to bring before the House today. There's something that I think the average person also doesn't know. This was a segregated city, and it did not, or Congress did not allow it to denounce and get rid of racial segregation. I mean, the buses were, no, the buses were the only thing buses and streetcars that weren't segregated, but public accommodations were segregated. And yet, during the very years of segregation, we have some very distinguished members of the armed forces who were African Americans who stand out still in American history. The first African American general born and raised in the District of Columbia. The first African American Air Force general, this is in the entire country, born and raised in the District of Columbia. The first African American Naval Academy graduate, born and raised in the District of Columbia. The first African American Air Force graduate, born and raised in the District of Columbia. What a history of distinguished citizens, particularly these citizens who served so illustriously in our armed forces, reaching the highest ranks, but nevertheless came home with fewer rights or for fewer rights than any other Americans. If there is to be a statehood provision that, as I have predicted, will become law in this House and make its way to the Senate, will there still be a capital? I thought I should indicate some of the issues that may occur to the average citizens. Yes, because our bill preserves federal control over the national capital area, and that's the federal enclave. That's right here. That's where the so-called Capitol complex, the federal monuments, the federal buildings, the National Mall, all that federal jurisdiction is maintained. The 51st state gives the district control only over the neighborhoods where the residents and the businesses are to be found. So there's not much that is upset or will appear very different, frankly, when visitors come to what is now known as Washington, D.C. By the way, it will still be called Washington, D.C., but D.C. will stand for Douglas Commonwealth. Where did D.C. get that notion? That notion comes from Frederick Douglass's own home here in the District of Columbia, that icon of American history. And it should be noted that while he is remembered foremost for his work against slavery in the United States, he was a very energetic proponent of full equality for all the residents of the District of Columbia. To this day, we have been able, through a bill I got passed in this House, to have a statue of Frederick Douglass. We are the only city, that's what we are at the moment, that has a statue. Each state has 2 statues. We expect to get another statue, although I won't say that until it is announced formally. But then we will be the only non-state to have 2 statues. The statue of Frederick Douglass can be seen right here in the Capitol, and it acknowledges that it was contributed by the residents of the District of Columbia. Now, as ardent as we have been in pursuing statehood, we are determined to get full equality any way we can. So that I have simultaneously introduced a bill that uses another strategy. And that is because the district doesn't even have full what we call home rule, to make sure at the very same time that we're pursuing statehood, because it'll take us a little more time to get through the Senate, that we pursue a strategy that would enhance our home rule so that we would get many of the same authorities that would come through our statehood bill. And those are on a dual track. And let me indicate what some of them are. For example, every bill that the D.C. Council passes has to come over here. It's never touched. So it has to lie over here for 30 days. What nonsense is that? So one of the home rule bills to enhance home rule would simply get rid of that. You don't need to be a state to have a local prosecutor. Why is the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, local street crimes here in the District of Columbia appointed by the President of the United States? Virtually all of her jurisdiction is on police crime here in the District of Columbia. She should be appointed by the mayor of the District of Columbia. Same time we're going for statehood, we'll have a bill on this for a local prosecutor. We'll have a bill allowing the mayor to deploy the National Guard. We see what is happening with climate change, and every jurisdiction is on the lookout to prepare itself for whatever may come. The D.C. National Guard would be our last refuge. Unlike the Guard in the states, and even in the territories, the district's mayor or chief executive has no authority to call out the National Guard if there's a hurricane, if there's a flood. So she's got to somehow find her way up the chain of command to the president to say, please, Mr. President, can I call out my own National Guard? The National Guard of the District of Columbia helps us in a multitude of ways. But in the way that could count most, there would be a delay because the district doesn't have the authority to call out its own National Guard. So we want that even before statehood. We want that now. We don't have control over our local courts. These courts don't have anything to do with the federal government. That authority should be with the D.C. Council. And there are many more. But to point out the ridiculous nature of not, in fact, having even rights that Americans take for granted, leave aside, if you will, the right to vote on this House floor, the right to Senate representation, but matters about which Congress knows nothing and wants to know nothing, like a local prosecutor, like the right to deploy members of the National Guard. So you can see why I'm on dual tracks. Want statehood, which is absolute and pure equality with other Americans, but in the meantime, we are unwilling to pass up what we could get incrementally, and that is simply control over all our local matters, or as many of them as we can. There are many reasons why D.C. statehood is ripe. Denying statehood to the nation's capital is a violation of international law. And that has been noted. Our country, in 1977, that's before I came to Congress, signed what is called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Well, the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations has twice indicated that the United States, by denying the residents of its nation's capital equal rights with other parts of the country, is in violation of international law. It said, remains, to quote the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, it said that the United Nations remains concerned that residents of the District of Columbia do not enjoy full representation, and here I'm quoting, in Congress, a restriction which does not seem to be compatible with Article 25 of the Covenant. That's the article we signed in 1977. And thus we've been found in violation of international law. Madam Speaker, may I ask how much time I have remaining?
The gentlelady has 6 minutes.
We are very pleased at the large number, now over 100, organizations that have endorsed D.C. statehood. That is important to us because they themselves have millions of constituents. One of our greatest problems has been nationalizing this issue. In fact, the residents are frustrated that people come to the nation's capital and they think that the residents of their capital have the same rights we have. So we simply don't have a national pulpit every day that informs them. So these 100+ national organizations spreading the word, cascading it, are very important to us. Now, I'm not going to name all 100, but to give you an idea of how broad their constituency is, they include people like Common Cause, the National Active and Retired Employees Association, the Sierra Club, People for the American Way, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. You see that there are unions there. There are good government organizations there. There are organizations of every kind. And that is one of the reasons that we are sure that this bill is going to ultimately pass the Senate as well. We draw to the attention of the House that democracy has always been an aspiration of our country. Look at who we are. When our country was created, only white men could vote. It took 132 years for white women to be able to vote. They had to sit down in the streets. They had to go to the old Lorton prison, the prison for the District of Columbia. They chained themselves to the White House gates. So if you want to know why we are undaunted, when we see that half the population had to go through much that we have experienced and finally attain the vote, we cannot afford to be pessimistic. But we remind those who come to this floor and say how proud they are of what a democracy we are, that H.R. 1 has democracy-enhancing provisions because we're not a democracy yet. And the worst blow to democracy is that the nation's capital does not have full democracy because it does not have the same rights, including full voting rights in the Congress itself. The framers understood that they were creating an imperfect democracy. Remember, our Constitution is a set of compromises. They had to get the Constitution done. They had to abide 3/5 of a man. That was the compromise for not counting the black slaves. There were many who signed the bill who opposed that in every way. But when you have a democracy with as many different factions as ours had then and have now, those are the compromises you make. You will be faulted only if, over time, you do not correct those inadequacies. I am grateful that we had barely come into session. We have been in session now only since January, with Democrats in control of that House, that the Speaker issued a very powerful statement endorsing statehood, that our Majority Leader has endorsed, Steny Hoyer has endorsed the bill. And yes, I believe that we are coming to the end of an era for 218 years, where the residents of our nation's capital have been second-class citizens. That is a term normally applied to African Americans. But every citizen of the United States will tell you second-class citizen knew no color. It meant every resident of the District of Columbia. We are closing this era in the House of Representatives during the 216th Congress. And I am predicting, based on the number of co-sponsors, that this bill will pass the House. It will be a historic day. It will buoy this bill to the other side of this House so that the district becomes the 51st state of the United States. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
His time has expired. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 831, an act to direct the Secretary of Transportation to request nominations for and make determinations regarding roads to be designated under the National Scenic Byways Program and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from the District of Columbia seek recognition?
I move to adjourn the House Summit.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
And the House gaveling out. Earlier today, they agreed to the rules for debate for 3 bills restricting oil and gas drilling in the U.S. All 3 measures will be debated and voted on in the House tomorrow. They also agreed to legislation that would make the interview process for Federal Reserve Bank presidents more inclusive and diverse. Follow live House coverage here on C-SPAN. We're going to stay on Capitol Hill and take you live to the House Judiciary Committee, which is working on a number of gun violence prevention bills. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Were harassed, assaulted, and ignored for